The woman by the curb. Afternoon sun glowed softly over a quiet Los Angeles street. It was the kind of day that made people linger outside longer than usual. Birds chirped lazily, and the breeze felt gentle on the skin. Cars passed in silence, and no one seemed in a hurry, except for one woman. She stood near the curb with a bag of groceries too heavy for her thin frame. Her back was slightly hunched, her coat too large, her hands trembling as she tried to keep the paper bag from splitting. Apples rolled at the bottom. A carton of eggs tilted dangerously. She looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Most people walked past her. Some looked, none stopped. Then a black motorcycle pulled to the side. The man on it took off his helmet slowly. Behind dark sunglasses, his eyes locked on the woman. He didn't hesitate. KeanuReeves climbed off the bike and walked over. "Mom, may I help you with that?" he said, gently holding the bag before it tore apart completely. The woman blinked, startled. You're that actor, aren't you?" Her voice was rough, like it hadn't been used much. Her lips were dry, and her clothes were worn, but clean. Keanu smiled. "That doesn't matter right now. I just don't want your groceries to end up in the street." She looked at him unsure, then nodded slowly. "Thank you. I live just a few blocks down." Keanu offered his arm. She took it, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence. Together, they walked. As they passed by store windows and small trees, people whispered and pointed. Some took photos. Keanu ignored them all. He focused only on her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Grace," she replied. "Grace Ellis. Nice to meet you, Grace. I'm Keanu." She gave a dry laugh. "I know who you are." He glanced sideways at her. "And what about you, Grace? What do you do?" She didn't answer right away. Her face shifted, not with pain, but with something deeper, something locked away for years. "I used to be a teacher," she said quietly. "A long time ago." "What did you teach? Music?" Keanu smiled. "Beautiful." Grace gave another small nod. "I don't play anymore." They walked in silence for a few steps. Then Grace added, "The world forgets old women, Keanu. It forgets the music, too." He didn't respond right away. He just held her groceries tighter, as if trying to protect something fragile. Finally, they reached her building. It was old, red-bricked, and cracked at the corners. Keanu looked up. "You live here alone?" "I've lived here since 1984. She said. "My husband passed a decade ago. No children. Just me now." He nodded, not pressing. Grace opened the door with effort. Keanu helped her inside. The hallway was dim. The lights flickered, and the smell of dust and boiled vegetables lingered. They climbed to flights of creaking stairs. Her apartment was small, clean, and filled with memories. Black and white photos sat on the shelf. Old records were stacked in a neat pile. A piano stood in the corner, covered in a sheet. "Please sit," Grace offered, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. Keanu looked around. "Your home is warm." Grace gave a sad smile. "It remembers me." She made tea, her hands shaking slightly as she poured the water. Keanu took the cup from her, helping without asking. "Why did you stop playing music?" he asked. Grace sighed and looked at the piano. "Life gets quiet when you lose people. Sometimes too quiet for music." He sat back and thought about her. "Words, you know," he said. "Sometimes quiet isn't empty. Sometimes it's waiting." Grace looked at him then, truly looked. Her eyes softened. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. "A boy I once taught." He had that same quiet sadness in his eyes, the kind you don't learn from movies or books. Keanu didn't speak. He just listened. Grace reached for a photo frame on the shelf. It showed a young woman in a long dress, standing in front of a music hall, smiling brightly. "That was me," she said. "I was the youngest female conductor in New York before I gave it all up." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Why did you leave that life?" Grace sipped her tea. "There was a scandal, a misunderstanding that ruined my name. The media didn't care for truth back then either. So I disappeared, moved west, started over." He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Grace looked down. "They thought I stole from the school, but I didn't. I was framed by someone who wanted my job." Keanu sat in stunned silence. "I never cleared my name." she said. I just walked away. The room was heavy with silence. Outside, birds chirped again. Life continued. Grace, Keanu said after a long pause, do you still have your music sheets? She looked up. Yes. They're in the drawer. Why? Because I'd like to hear you play. She laughed, a bit nervously. I haven't played in 20 years. Keanu stood. Then let's change that today. Grace hesitated. Then slowly, as if waking from a long sleep, she moved to the piano. She lifted the cover. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She pressed one note, then another. The sound was fragile, but it was there. She began to play. Keanu closed his eyes. The melody filled the room. Gentle, sorrowful, alive. And just like that, the past began to breathe again. What neither of them knew was that the apartment next door had a thin wall, and a young man sitting behind it, recording a podcast about forgotten artists. He paused, his recording as the music seeped through. He pressed record again. I don't know who's playing this, he whispered into the mic, but it sounds like someone coming back to life. Outside, the sun began to set, but inside Grace's small apartment, something beautiful had just begun. What started as a simple act of kindness would soon unravel a truth that would change both their lives forever, and the world was about to. Remember Grace Ellis, the return of music. The next morning, Grace Ellis awoke with a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time in years, she had slept through the night. No dreams, no shadows of the past, just silence that no longer felt empty. She sat up slowly, the sunlight pouring through the thin curtains onto the piano keys. Her fingers tingled, her bones ached, but something inside her had shifted. She shuffled into the kitchen and was startled to see a brown paper bag sitting on the table. It was filled with fresh bread, strawberries, tea, and a small handwritten note for Grace, whose music still moves the world. Keanu. She stared at it for a long time. Outside, she heard movement. She opened her front door slowly and saw him. Keanu was kneeling near her front step, fixing the cracked tiles without being asked. You don't have to do that, she called. He looked up and smiled. I know. She watched him work. No cameras, no entourage, no rush. When he finished, he dusted off his hands. I brought breakfast. She stepped aside, letting him in again. The room already looked different, like it remembered the joy from the night before. Grace set the table. You're kind, Keanu, more than I expected. He shrugged gently. You reminded me of someone. My mother was a quiet soul, too. She never stopped giving, even when the world forgot her. Grace paused. That kind of woman never truly disappears. They sat together, eating strawberries and buttered toast. As they ate, Keanu looked at the piano. Do you want to play again today? Grace hesitated. I want to, but I'm afraid. Of what? Of remembering what it felt like to matter. Keanu nodded slowly. Maybe you never stopped mattering. Maybe people just stopped looking. That sentence sat between them for a long time. Meanwhile, just one wall away, the young podcaster, Daniel, sat stunned. He had spent the entire night listening to the recording of Grace's music from the day before. It haunted him. It soothed him. It felt like a secret he wasn't meant to hear, yet couldn't forget. He searched the internet for any mention of Grace Ellis, conductor, music, but came up mostly empty until he stumbled on an archived article from 1981. It showed a black and white image of a young woman at Carnegie Hall. The headline read, Rising Star Conductor Embroiled in Scandal Resigns Suddenly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He clicked the article. The story claimed Grace had misused school funds. No trial, no investigation, just public humiliation. Daniel frowned. This doesn't feel right, he whispered. He decided to knock in Grace's apartment. Keanu had just asked her something unexpected. Would you teach me something simple? On the piano, Grace blinked. You want to learn? Just one melody. She smiled. All right. Something gentle. They sat side by side. Her fingers guided his slowly across the keys. C, D, a soft scale. She whispered notes like old secrets. Then came the knock. Grace opened the door slowly. A young man with headphones around his neck stood there. Hi, he said nervously. Sorry. I'm Daniel. I live next door. I heard you playing yesterday. Grace stiffened. I know. It sounds weird, Daniel added quickly, but I record forgotten music for my podcast. I didn't mean to record you. It came through the wall. Keanu stood behind her. His presence made Daniel flinch a bit. You recorded it? Grace said, her voice calm. Just a few minutes, he admitted, but it was incredible. I've been doing this for years and I've never heard anything like it. I Googled your name. I found one article. It wasn't right. Grace's eyes darkened. What do you want from me? Nothing, Daniel said. I want people to hear your music. I want them to know the truth. Keanu looked at Grace. It's your choice. Grace stepped back, staring at the piano. After a long silence, she said, "Come in." Daniel entered, careful not to touch anything. He gazed at the room like it was a sacred space. Grace sat at the piano. Play it again? Daniel asked. She nodded. Her fingers touched the keys. This time, there was no hesitation. As she played, Keanu watched her not as a stranger helping an old woman, but as a witness to a soul returning to life. The music was stronger now, richer, deeper. Daniel's eyes welled up. He had heard thousands of recordings, but this was something else. When she finished, he was silent. I'll share only if you say yes, Daniel said. Grace looked at Keanu. He gave a small nod. Maybe the world's ready to hear you again. She smiled faintly, then let them listen. Daniel stood and bowed his head. Thank you, Grace. That night, Daniel uploaded a 10-minute podcast titled The Woman Next Door. He left out her name, out of respect, but the episode included her playing and a heartfelt narration about forgotten artists and the power of second chances. Within hours, it went viral. Comments poured in. This music saved my night. Who is she? I haven't cried in years. Until now. Keanu sat in his apartment, scrolling through the reactions. He smiled, then closed the phone. In Grace's apartment, the piano cover remained open. Her past was no longer a secret, but her deepest truth still was. Because Grace Ellis carried something far more powerful than music. Something that would soon come to light, and when it did, it would shake Keanu to his core. The letter in the drawer. Grace Ellis woke to the sound of her own name being spoken on the radio. She hadn't heard that in decades. The mysterious pianist in yesterday's viral podcast has finally been named. Grace Ellis, once the youngest female conductor in New York, is the woman behind the music that's now touching hearts across the world. Her hands trembled, slightly, not from fear but from something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition. She stood slowly, made tea, and stared at the piano. It was no longer a relic. It had become her voice again. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. This time, when she opened the door, a woman in her early 30s stood there with a camera around her neck and a press badge clipped to her shirt. Miss Ellis, the woman asked, clearly stunned to see her. I'm sorry to show up unannounced. I'm Claire from Harmony Journal. Your story, it's everywhere. I just wanted to ask if we could talk. Grace was about to say no when Keanu stepped up behind her in the hallway. I'll stay if you'd like, he offered. Grace thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, come in. They sat in the warm little apartment, and Claire set the recorder gently on the table. As if afraid to break the air, people are calling you a miracle, Claire said softly. They're saying your music feels like healing, like something lost coming home. Grace smiled gently. They're kind. But I'm no miracle. Keanu leaned forward. You gave people something they forgot. They needed. Claire asked the questions gently about Grace's childhood, her career, the scandal. Grace answered honestly. She spoke of the betrayal from a fellow teacher, the missing donation funds, the silence from the school board, and how she'd chosen to disappear rather than fight a battle. She was too tired to win. I didn't want my students to see me like that, Grace whispered. So I left everything behind. I didn't even pack my trophies, just one suitcase, and my music. Claire's voice was quiet. Did you ever think the truth would come out? No, Grace said. I stopped waiting for justice a long time ago. After Claire left, Grace and Keanu sat in silence. He spoke first. You shouldn't have had to go through that alone. Grace gave him a tired smile. I stopped expecting anyone to stand beside me. Keanu looked down. I know how that feels. Grace's eyes softened. But you came back. You helped a woman on the street. That means something. He stood, paced the small space, then stopped. Grace, do you know what that music did? Daniel's podcast got over 10 million plays overnight. Major orchestras are reaching out. People want to hear from you again. She looked down, overwhelmed. I'm not ready for the spotlight again. Then let them come to your world, Keanu said. Not the other way around. She considered this. Then she stood slowly, went to the bookshelf, and opened the bottom drawer. Behind old books and papers, there was a sealed envelope, yellowed with time. I never opened this, she said, holding it gently. It arrived the day after I left New York. I recognized the handwriting. It was from one of my students, the one who tried to defend me. He had written letters to the school board, but he was just 16. They ignored him. Keanu stepped closer. What happened to him? Grace shook her head. I never found out. I didn't want to drag him down with me. She peeled the envelope open slowly. Inside was a letter, written in blue ink. Her hands trembled as she read aloud. Dear Ms. Tallis, they won't listen to me. They think you're guilty, but I know the truth. I saw Randall take the envelope. I didn't know what to do then, but now I do. One day, the world will see who you really are. I promise. Love, Jake. Grace's knees weakened. She sat down quickly. Keanu sat beside her. He saw the theft. She nodded. And he tried to tell them. Keanu stood. Then it's time the world hears this letter. It's too late, Grace whispered. Jake would be a grown man now. Who knows where he is? Keanu pulled out his phone. I'll find him. Later that day, Daniel returned. Grace, you need to see this. He handed her a tablet. A video clip had just gone viral. It showed a famous cellist on stage during an award ceremony. I dedicate this performance, the man said, to the woman who taught me that music is truth. Grace Ellis, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're still playing. Your lessons saved me. You saved me. The name appeared on screen. Jacob Randall, celebrated composer. Former student of Grace Ellis. Keanu single quotes S. Jaw tightened. Randall, was that the name of the teacher who framed you? Grace nodded slowly. His father, head of the department. He ruined me. And now his son. She couldn't finish the sentence. Keanu stepped back. We need to talk to Jacob. But Grace wasn't ready. Not yet. That night, Grace sat by the window. The city lights blinked in silence. What if I've forgotten how to be strong? She whispered. Keanu sat beside her. Strength doesn't vanish, Grace. It waits. She turned to him. And what about you? What are you running from? He hesitated. Then he said, my best friend passed away last year. We made a promise to never stop believing in people. But I stopped showing up until I met you. Her hand touched his gently. Then maybe we both stopped waiting at the same time. The night grew quiet again, but not empty, because music, once awakened, never truly disappears. And tomorrow, everything would change again. Because Jacob Randall was about to knock on Grace Ellis's door. And he wasn't alone. The son of the man who broke her mourning began with a stillness that almost felt like a warning. Grace Ellis stood by her window, wrapped in a soft gray shawl. The steam from her tea rose quietly, like smoke from an old fire that refused to die out. Every few minutes, she glanced at the hallway outside her door as if expecting something or someone. Keanu had promised to stay nearby. He sensed something was coming. He didn't know what, but he could feel it in the tension that had settled over the small apartment like dust on untouched shelves. Then, just after 9 a.m., the knock came. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't soft. It was deliberate. Grace opened the door slowly. Standing there was a tall man in his early 40s. His hands were at his sides, not clenched, not threatening. He looked unsure, vulnerable. Behind him stood a woman with a press badge and a quiet expression. Ms. Ellis, the man said. I'm Jacob Randall. I think you taught me how to breathe through music. I never got to thank you. Grace didn't move, didn't blink. Her voice came out as a whisper. I know who you are. Jacob lowered his eyes. My father destroyed you, and I've carried that guilt my whole life. Keanu stepped into the hallway, standing beside Grace, not saying a word. Jacob continued. I knew you didn't do it. I tried to speak out. They silenced me. My father pulled me out of your class, then sent you away. Grace's hands trembled. You were just a boy, Jacob's voice cracked. But I wasn't blind. I saw how much you gave us, how you believed in us. I saw him take the money from the office. I told the board. They said I was confused. I wasn't. The woman beside him stepped forward. I'm Leah Monroe. I'm a reporter with the New York Tribune. Jacob asked me to come with him. He wants to make things right. Publicly. Grace looked at Jacob. After all these years. Why now? Jacob's eyes welled. Because I'm a father now. And if someone ever hurt my daughter the way my father hurt you, I'd want the world to know the truth. Keanu placed a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. Grace opened the door wider. Come in. Inside, the small apartment seemed to shrink with the weight of history. Jacob looked round, recognizing traces of the woman who once stood at the front of his childhood classroom. He noticed the framed photograph of Grace outside Carnegie Hall. I remember this day. He said softly, you made us feel like we were part of something magical. Grace smiled faintly. I thought I had lost all that. Leah unpacked a small recorder. With your permission, Ms. Ellis, I'd like to document this, not as an expose, but as a correction of history. Grace hesitated, then nodded. The recording began. Jacob spoke of the music program, the rivalry his father had with Grace, the sudden disappearance of funds, the accusations, the forced resignation, and the silence that followed. He told the truth. He cleared her name, and as his words poured out, Grace's eyes filled with quiet tears, not of sadness but of release. When he finished, there was silence. Grace stood up slowly, walked to the piano, and sat. She played the same melody she had once taught Jacob, the one he had never forgotten. His eyes closed, and for a moment, he was a boy again, sitting in the second row, dreaming of symphonies. Leah whispered into the recorder, this is not the sound of a victim. This is the sound of a survivor. After the interview, Jacob pulled a small envelope from his coat. This is a letter from the Board of Trustees, he said. They're offering a public apology. They want to name the new music wing after you, the Grace Ellis Center for Resilience in Music. Grace took the envelope with shaking hands. I don't want statues or buildings. I just want young musicians to be heard. They will, Jacob said, because you never stopped playing. As he left, he turned at the door. There's one more thing. I found an old recording of our last recital with you. I've been restoring it. Would you come to New York and introduce it? At a small concert next month, nothing grand. Just former students, friends, and a piano. Grace looked at Keanu, her eyes wide. I haven't traveled in years. Keanu smiled. Then maybe it's time. That night, the interview went live. Within hours, it trended worldwide. Grace Ellis exonerated after 40 years. Jacob Randall exposes truth behind teacher's downfall. The music never stopped, it just waited. Keanu sat beside Grace as they read the comments, some from her old students, some from strangers who were simply moved. Grace leaned back. I don't know what I did to deserve this kindness. Keanu looked at her, his voice quiet. Maybe you were always kind, and the world is just catching up. They didn't know it yet, but something even greater was coming. Because deep in a hospital across town, an old man lay in bed. His name was Thomas Randall, Jacob's father, and he had just heard his name on the news. He reached for a nurse and whispered, find her. I need to see Grace Ellis before I die. The confession's morning air was cold, colder than usual for Los Angeles. Grace Ellis stood at her piano, staring at a photo she hadn't touched in decades. A group of students, smiling under stage lights. Her fingers brushed over Jacob's young face in the corner. A quiet knock broke her thoughts. Keanu entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked serious. Jacob just called. His father wants to see you. Grace froze. Her back stiffened. Her voice barely above a whisper. Why now? Keanu placed the coffee on the table. He's dying. In a hospital across town. He asked for you by name. She turned away from him. He destroyed everything. My work. My name. My future. Keanu stepped closer. I know. But you deserve to hear the truth, even if it comes too late. Grace sat down slowly, the weight of the past pulling at her shoulders. I don't want to forgive him. You don't have to, Keanu said gently. But maybe it's time to stop carrying the part of him he left behind. She looked up at him. Will you come with me? He nodded. Always. They rode. In silence, the city blurred past, familiar but distant. Outside the hospital, Grace hesitated. What if he doesn't really regret it? What if he just wants to clear his conscience before he goes? Then let him, Keanu said. But you walk out with your truth intact. They entered the hospital together. Inside room 417. Thomas Randall lay thin, gray, and barely able to speak. Machines beeped softly. A nurse nodded and stepped out as they entered. Jacob stood at the foot of the bed, his face pale with tension. Double quotes, Ms. Ellis, Thomas rasped, his voice dry like paper. You came. Grace stood at the door. I didn't come for your peace. I came for mine. Thomas nodded weakly. I deserve that. A long silence filled the room, heavy like fog. Then, with difficulty, he said, I was jealous. You were younger, better. The students loved you. You built something beautiful, and I hated you for it. Grace said nothing. I took the money. Thomas whispered, and blamed you. I made it look real. I even convinced the board it was for the good of the school. I thought they'd forget you. I thought music would forget you. He began to cry, not loud, but real. But it didn't. He said, you won. After all this time, you still won. Grace stepped closer. I didn't win. I lost. Everything, my name, my stage, my students. Thomas nodded, guilt all over his sunken face. I know, and I can never undo it. But if there's anything left in me, anything human, I want to say I'm sorry, not because I want forgiveness, but because I need you to know the truth was always yours. Grace stood quietly. Why now? She asked, her voice trembling. Why ask me here to say something you could have said 40 years ago? He closed his eyes, breathing slow and shallow. Because I thought silence protected me, but it only ate me alive. Jacob wiped his face and stepped out of the room, overwhelmed. Grace sat in the chair beside the bed. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't deserve it. Thomas whispered. They sat in silence. Then Grace did something no one expected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of music. It was old, yellowed, but clearly cherished. This is the first piece I ever composed, she said. I wrote it the week after I was forced to leave. She placed it on the table near his bed. If you want to die with peace, she said, listen to the music you tried to silence. She stood and turned to go. As she reached the door, Thomas whispered, I'm sorry, Grace. She paused. So am I, she replied softly. Outside, Jacob stood against the hallway wall, looking devastated. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. You are not him. He nodded slowly. I just wish I'd done more. You were a child. Grace said, but now you're making it right. That's what matters. Keanu led her outside. As they stepped into the sunlight, Grace stopped suddenly. I feel lighter, she said. Keanu looked at her. You did something brave. I did something necessary, she corrected, for myself, that evening. Jacob held a small press conference. Reporters gathered. Microphones lined the table. He stood before them and said, 40 years ago, my father accused Grace Ellis of a crime she did not commit. Today, on his deathbed, he confessed to that lie. This is not just a correction, it's a tribute to a woman who gave everything to music and asked for nothing in return. Grace watched the broadcast from her apartment. Tears ran silently down her cheeks, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of closure. Keanu poured her a glass of tea. You know what comes next? A concert, Grace whispered. A final one. He raised his glass. Then let's make it unforgettable. Because Grace Ellis was not done yet. In fact, her most important performance was still waiting. Her final concerto auditorium was modest, tucked behind an old university building in New York. But the moment Grace Ellis stepped through its doors, it felt like returning to a place she'd only seen in dreams. The floorboards creaked with history, the air carried whispers of symphonies, and the stage worn but proud waited quietly for her. The event was invitation only, but word had spread. Former students flew in. Musicians she once inspired sat in the front row. The program simply read, An Evening with Grace Ellis. KeanuReeves stood backstage with her, dressed in a simple dark suit. He kept his hand gently on her back. You okay? Grace took a deep breath. I'm nervous. You've faced worse than this. True, she smiled. But this time, the silence is listening. Keanu nodded slowly. Then give it something to remember. The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, after 40 years away from the stage, conductor and pianist Grace Ellis. As Grace stepped into the spotlight, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Before she even touched the piano, applause thundered. People wept, and yet she stood quietly, hands clasped, taking it all in with humble grace. She sat at the grand piano. Her fingers rested on the keys. The room fell silent. Then, with the gentleness of falling snow, she began to play. The melody was new, but it carried echoes of every pain, every joy, every lost moment reclaimed. It was not a song for fame or recognition. It was a song of survival, of truth, of returning. People closed their eyes. Some held hands. Even the air seemed to pause. For her. When she reached the final note, she let it linger. And for a long, beautiful moment, no one moved. Then came the applause, louder than before, the kind that shakes walls. Tears ran down Grace's cheeks, but her hands were steady. Jacob Randall walked on stage and hugged her. The same boy who once sat in her classroom, now a man helping restore her legacy. He stepped to the microphone. I would like to make an announcement. Moving forward, every year this university will grant a full scholarship to one young musician under the Grace Ellis Award for Artistic Resilience. We believe talent should never be forgotten. Another round of applause. Flashbulbs popped. But Grace wasn't listening anymore. She was looking out into the crowd. In the far back row, an elderly woman stood, dressed in white. Her eyes glistened. Grace blinked. The woman gave a slow, proud nod, then vanished into the crowd. Keanu found her backstage, sitting on a wooden bench. You saw her, didn't you? He asked quietly. Grace nodded. My mother, she used to sit at every recital. I felt her tonight. Keanu sat beside her. You gave the world more than music tonight. You gave it grace. She looked at him, her voice soft. And you gave me a second life. Outside, cameras waited, interviews buzzed. But Grace Ellis didn't want any more lights. She walked past them, all holding Keanu's arm, her head high. Back in Los Angeles, Daniel released the final episode of his podcast. It was titled The Woman Who Returned. He ended it with one line. She was never lost. The world just stopped listening. The next morning, Grace returned home. On her doorstep was a small note. No name, just handwriting she didn't recognize. Your music saved my daughter. She heard your concert while in recovery. She wants to learn piano now. Thank you for not giving up. Grace folded the note gently and placed it in her piano bench. That afternoon, she taught her first private student in 40 years, a shy, 11-year-old girl who had never touched keys before. Grace smiled as she guided her hand. Remember, she whispered, music isn't about being perfect, it's about being true. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Keanu returned with groceries, carrying them with the same care he had shown on the very first day. Grace opened the door. You again, she teased gently. Always, he said with a grin. She let him in, because in a world that had once forgotten her, kindness had helped her be remembered. And in the quiet between notes, Grace Ellis had finally found peace.